Outlook by Charlie Johns. Chapter 1. Benjamin Flew. Everyone becomes who they truly are through two types of pain. A pain handed over to you and a pain that is self-inflicted. As psychoanalysts have depicted, the building blocks of pain are set up in early childhood, even before one is born. But the awareness of such building seems to settle and congeal within oneself in the mid to late 20s. The predicament that one feels themselves in, when one truly realizes such, is what makes a man an adult. Like the history of Christ split between the before and after of his crucifixion, one can split their life into the feeling of nonchalance before the realization of one's true disposition, and the situation of attempting to love and be loved whilst acknowledging the illness that defines them and the futility of its overcoming. The question always remains as to whether it were the actual traumatic events in life that brought on this morbid realization, or whether it was solely the realization itself, expanding, accumulating, basking in its own poignancy, diving into the recesses of the soul, appearing at the forefront of one's mind like a wasp that you bat out of the way in irritation in order to get on with the task in hand. Alas, friends, there is no going back or moving forward for me. In early childhood, my overactive imagination was nurtured. I was encouraged to play out the detailed fantasies I had in my head, whether through soldiers and dolls or through the dozens of stories I wrote every day. At one point, I particularly remember drawing an entire city and designating to it certain imaginary lives such as husbands and wives, firemen, politicians, and even a church and a school. I would spend days animating these invisible people through their daily lives with only the movement of my eyes carrying them to certain places. I even allowed these characters to have their own inner lives and dreams, which I miraculously achieved without forgetting the precise plane of reality I occupied. Soon after the disappearance of my mother and father's soul-replenishing love and care for me, because of their subsequent divorce and the general assumption that a man should grow to be fully independent, I enrolled as an art student in London. I felt alone, living in a tiny dormitory within a ginormous city, and all I could feel were the waves of fear and possibility capsizing me and pinning me forever to my bed. Soon I would realize two tormenting truths. First, that the overactive imagination I was blessed with as a child was, in fact, a curse. I remember reading somewhere for the first time what I was, what I am, and the immediacy of its truth pierced through me as if I had somehow whispered it into my own ear as I read the definition. Neurosis. Behavioral symptoms such as phobic avoidance, vigilance, impulsive and compulsive acts, lethargy, etc., cognitive problems such as unpleasant or disturbing thoughts, repetition of thoughts and obsession, habitual fantasizing, negativity, cynicism, etc. The definition was acceptable enough, but it was only through Freud that I realized the foundations for such neurosis. It was only through Freud that I painfully learnt and accepted a second truth, the effects that sexual taboo and infidelity had upon me. I will avoid the exposition of reasons why this is to be the case for my neurosis, but I will say that part of it was plain unluckiness. After my dark adventure into all things psychological, I can say now with full understanding that it seems tragic enough for the human race to have to unwittingly carry out their experiences of childhood, dare I say the experiences of their parents, for their whole lives, but to also experience such cruel fate twice by particular persons that come into your life, who you build trust with and love. Now, that is an evil repetition that none should have to bear. Because this was my fate, I now love and hate equally. I hate all those that I love because my love is unconditional, and therefore I cannot retract that love even when they mock it or transform it into a way that can give me pain. I love all those I hate, simply in the sense that my enemies, including my loved ones, take over my mind and provide me with an infinity of images, sensations, and feelings so intimately studied by myself that such intimacy must be love if it is to be anything at all. This would perhaps be bearable if I wasn't also an idealist and a romantic. However, it is my almost religious, almost transcendental desire to be truly loved by a woman that causes such desperate despair, to wish to lie with her naked upon her sweet bosom while she caresses my sweat-ridden brow and whispers my name. This sacred yet ultimately impossible desire is why I wish to die and be at rest now. When I look back at the memories, even those ones that give me momentary delight, they become, through examination, false and impure. Even when I think of my lover's smile and her flowing dress, it is soon followed by the opening of her legs for another, her mouth open, tongue touching another's, giving the other sweet sensation. Even when I think of my mother and father, I do not see all that they have sacrificed for me, all the care that only parents can truly give. I instead see alcohol, laughter, jealousy, lust, selfishness, infidelity. In truth, I see them as myself. There are times when I mutter under my breath that this whole situation is unfair. But what does it mean to say this? Nature is not fair. The clotting of blood, the building of an abscess, do these comply to the laws of fairness? If one were a Christian, one might be able to ask this question. One might look to God and ask why his intentions were to be this way. But most of us live in an ungodly world. Perhaps the smallest traces of religion can still be found when a child being stung by a nettle, or I myself, under the tyranny of despair, whimpers and proclaims that such is unfair. Chapter 2. Sam Wood. Like any event of death within life, things seemed to settle down after a while. The sadness and confusion disappeared, and the day-to-day activities of the 8 men that Benjamin sent his suicide email to, who were presumably the closest to Benjamin, ensued as if his death were only a nightly thunderstorm that departed with the rise of the sun the next morning. We were all interviewed the day after his death, but because these sessions were isolated to a one-to-one interrogation, I never got to meet Benjamin's friends. I was still a little perplexed, yet flattered, as to why he thought of me as one of these special select friends. I had taught him how to play basic guitar chords at my studio for approximately 6 weeks before his suicide. He was undoubtedly more competent at the guitar than he had first expressed, and had mastered some of its intricacies long before he had met me. He had seen a photocopied poster lying around in a hairdresser's, I think, and admired its honesty. Beginner's guitar lessons catered for by a semi-professional player with over 10 years' experience, looking to save up and enroll at music college sometime this millennium. £5 an hour, or anything you can afford. I remember Benji, in our last lesson, giving me £15 and telling me to go put it toward my studies. That was the last time I spoke to Benji. He would always take his watch off before practice and would always slowly put it back on after the practice had finished, keeping his gaze continually fixed to the face of his watch while he completed this resolute task. He would play on a spare guitar that I had lying around the studio, and so, when he left his lesson, he was absolutely free to do as he pleased. He would always walk to my house, and he would always walk out, perhaps meeting his wife, his girlfriend, stopping off at a bar, maybe simply walking home to bed. Of course, there was something mysterious about him. There is mystery in everyone. But it was a gentle mysteriousness that was always naturally sanguine. It wasn't a dark, sophisticated mysteriousness, but more like the mysteriousness of old film posters from the 50s that you pick up in auction houses, the mysteriousness of someone you meet on holiday who attempts to speak to you, but you cannot understand what they are saying. I ended up, after an amount of time had passed, as anyone would, bringing my perplexities and curiosities back to earth with the help of my girlfriend Isabel, and the comforting monotonous activities of day-to-day living. But it was Benjamin's email that now hovered in my thoughts. Why write such a lengthy soliloquy? Why did he feel, in his last distraught hour, the need to communicate those life-defining neuroses he calmly talks about? He obviously did not wish to cathartically expel them, as he states that they will never leave him in peace. Isn't he saying that he is these neuroses and nothing else? I soon began losing sleep to the idea that he was telling his faithful readers something else. I began thinking that he had entrusted some secret message to me, to the world, and its meaning lay hidden deep within his suicidal message. I began to wonder what this event was that simultaneously split his life into a past and future Benjamin Flew. Did he want us to discover it somehow, to unright his wrongs? Was he asking us to find this event in ourselves and hence set out on our own personal voyage of self-discovery? Whatever the answer was to this myriad-coded message, I began to realize at least one truth, that the neuroses inhabiting Benjamin's mind had unstuck themselves from his words and had found a home within my singular commonplace existence. After my long-awaited interview at the music college I so desperately wanted to study at, 2 years after Benjamin died, I realized what I had to do. I could either study the ways of musical composition, harmony, and cadence, or I could study the life of Benjamin Flew. After a moment's hesitation, I drew out all my savings from the last 3 years directed solely toward my education, and decided to buy the cheapest car I could find and visit every friend that Benjamin had sent his last remaining testament to. The easiest part was finding their names. Each of their email addresses was included within the message Benjamin had sent me. Not only a name, I thought, but direct contact with each and every one of them through the medium of email. I knew this wouldn't be enough, though, hence the car. I knew that email addresses could be deleted and that names could change. The medium of email didn't seem adequate for such a topic either. Surely one would wish to discuss the difficult issue of Benji's death face-to-face, in a pub, or words shared during a short walk, but if that wasn't Benji's style, then maybe it won't be theirs either. I won't lie to you. Of course I was looking to fill the immediate present with adventure and unknowing. I didn't want to just sit at home emailing 7 people waiting for them to get back to me. It was much more than that. Benjamin's letter, even from the beginning all those years ago, suggested something to me about my own life in the form of questions. Who am I? What is it that I am meant to be? What is it that I am meant to do? Perhaps I was traveling to find myself. After all, I am down on the list as one of these recipients. Isabel would not be happy with my decision to roam around the country, meeting strangers, sleeping in hotels, and probably drinking a lot. But they weren't strangers, they were Benji's most trusted friends. And through that trust, they would become my friends too. As it happens, Isabel was not unhappy because I had told her that I had enrolled at music college and would be away for 2 weeks watching various music recitals. I told her we had been thrown into the course, I think those were my words, and that I could not afford to miss such a valuable experience if I were to prove worthy of such a prestigious institution. What could she say? She knew how long it had taken me to save the money. She believed I was worthy of a degree. She knew it was important to me to make a good first impression. She looked at me with this perfect mixture of casualness and concern that only women seem to be able to pull off, and the rest is history. We slept together that night for the first time in 3 months. I slept a peaceful sleep in Isabel's arms. I dreamt of 3 discontinuous environments without narrative. I dreamt of exotic birds and plants like the ones in Henri Rousseau's paintings. I dreamt of a farmer's market in Iowa lit up beautifully at night, serving chili from out of these giant steaming cooking pots. And I dreamt of a little boy sulking in an indoor swimming pool. The next day I met up with a private dealer who was selling his car on the internet and gave him £600 for it up front. His dog, I assume it was his, was barking hysterically at me throughout the proceedings, and I could see 2 clocks adjacent to one another, telling different times, in the hallway of the man's house, through the front door he had left open. I drove back home whilst Isabel was at a dance audition and picked up a few clothes, some CDs for the car, my laptop, and the usual toiletries. I left a note on the fridge for Isabel that read, "Izzy, Izzy, Izzy, I'm sure you'll enjoy the peace and quiet whilst I'm gone. My phone is fully charged. Miss you already. Love you. Sam. Kisses. I locked the front door behind me and got into the car with all my stuff. The truth was, I did miss her already. I really didn't know what I was doing. I was already beginning to feel a bit gloomy. This obviously wasn't a good start. I drove to a 24-hour service station toward the motorway, parked the car, and got out my laptop in order to write a message to Benjamin's other 7 friends. I could write the message on my laptop. I write best on laptops with a proper keyboard, and then copy them over to my phone in order to send, the perks of infinite Wi-Fi roaming access. After floundering for an hour and overthinking, buying several large coffees from the service station and smoking half a pack of cigarettes, I got to work. Dear, insert here. I hope this email finds you well. I am writing to you about one of our beloved lost friends, Benjamin Flew. I was a good friend of Benjamin's, and it had occurred to me that I had never been introduced to any of his friends. Would you be interested in meeting up and having a chat? It has been almost 2.5 years since his death, and I really wish to know a bit more about the man he was, and indeed the friends he had. I will be free for the next couple of weeks, and I am happy to travel a fair way. Anyway, you have my email. Hope you get in touch. Blessings. Sam. These were the thoughts going through my mind as I stared upon my 12 lines of text hovering above a backlit computer screen. Can I send this one message to all the recipients, or would I have to tailor each email for each individual? But I don't know what is individual about any of them. But surely I can't attach all the recipients in one message, because they will see that I have just bunched them all together. But this is what Benji had done, right? Had not I seen the email earlier? What if no one replies for a few days? Weeks? What am I meant to do in the meantime? Sit in my car drinking large coffees, smoking cigarettes, fully aware that my girlfriend is 9 miles away deciding which shower gel to use? I thought about everything over the next few minutes. Probably not everything, but lots of things, many things I had not thought about before. I sat in my car and thought about whether the car fumes of a neighboring motorway would affect the fields of crops next to it. I knew a man who got asthmatic every time he visited his girlfriend's auntie's house because of the traffic fumes nearby, and I wondered if cabbages got asthmatic. I thought about the teenager who served me at my coffee and wondered about how many things might have changed since I was a teenager. Is teenage depression still a thing? Do teenagers still hate their parents and then realize later on in life that you can actually happily talk to them about what types of things you can put in a curry or what the best way to boil an egg is? When you get really old and live in a bungalow or an old person's home, do you do very little and embrace the little things in life because all of your brain cells have gone, or because you are slowly training yourself to accept the fact that the world will soon cease to assist you? Or perhaps you have filled such a large quota of experience that you slowly learn to adapt to the circadian rhythm of an indifferent universe. Or maybe you really do just wake up one day and want to take a trip to the shops and buy a low-maintenance miniature garden for your windowsill. I sent each email to the desired recipient individually with exactly the same content. I had to make some guesswork as to their full names. Some were easy. Brian_Rose35 @yahoo.com, Terry Organ77 @hotmail.com, J. Macaulay @parkcourts.ac.uk. Some were verging on downright weird. Celine@night @gmail.com, You and Whose Army @btconnect.com, The Most Handsome Man Alive @AOL.com, SerialKiller56 @gmail.com. In the event of such addresses, I either decided on their gender, or wrote sir or madam, or gave up and put both. Nothing more to do now but wait. I flirted with the idea of staying in the hotel next to the service station, maybe grabbing some food at this restaurant I could see near the truck stop. I would order a steak, a few sangrias, move to the bar, talk to the barman that graduated at Oxford. He would tell me why he packed it all in, the money, the success, just so he could quietly clean glasses, make cocktails, and talk to normal people. Doesn't that all sound fun? I glanced at the storage compartment on the inside of the car door and scanned the spines of the CDs I had brought with me. Brouwer, Guitar Music, Volume 1. Boccherini, String Quintets. Georges Bizet's Carmen. Essential Purcell, and Bartók's 6 Quartets. As my eyes skimmed the environment around me, I felt them glazing over a little. Evening was coming, and its blacks, yellows, blues, and purples were filling up the world, starting with my car. In a world full of so much obscurity and chaos, sleeping seems like an almost too simple phenomenon. I quickly realized that everyone has once been sleepy like a child. Caesar, Pontius Pilate, Napoleon, Hitler, all yawning and ready for bed. My eyes returned to the electronically lit screen on my mobile phone, and to my surprise I had received an email. Already? I thought to myself. It filled me with genuine excitement. What will this lead to? What will happen next? It was as if I were making my own story with the help of a few email addresses. I was to become quickly disappointed, however. The message read, "Many thanks for your email. I am on annual leave on Monday, 10th April, and on a research trip on Tuesday, 11th April. I will respond to your email on or soon after Wednesday, 12th April. If it is an urgent postgraduate research matter, please contact Lynn Johnson at ljohnson@parkcourts.ac.uk. Regards, Professor James Macaulay." I strongly believed at that moment that whoever invented the auto-reply message was a twit. Who is too important and busy to check their emails once a day? It is always some poncy professor, writer, or academic that uses these types of automated messages to make them appear too engrossed in the celestial world from mere correspondences through a computer. I was about to give up or go for that sangria, but then it struck me. Surely I have everything I need to find Professor James Macaulay. He is away for a few days, but he will soon be back at the university. Park Courts College? University? It is not urgent enough nor formal enough to contact this Lynn Johnson lady, so maybe I could just pop in. I typed in Park Courts postgraduate research into my phone and found a university near Boston. I checked the staff directory and found a Professor James Macaulay. His resume came up, and that was the first time I saw his face. Mr. Macaulay seemed like a pleasant man from his first digital appearance. He seemed to be smiling in his photograph, which is always a good sign. Shows that one does not take oneself too seriously. He was wearing a suit that didn't seem to fit him right. He looked like he was more student than teacher. His face was somewhere between oval and square. He was clean-shaven, eyes black, small and deep-set, with thick, black but well-shaped brows. He looked totally unpretentious, verging on naive. His subject specialization was on Carl Jung and the theory of synchronicity. He had graduated at Warwick University, first-class honors, and was writing a book called Meaningful Coincidences on Walking and Acausality. I decided to set course for Park Courts University immediately. Images of meeting James flowed through my mind, shaking hands, speaking of Benjamin, burrowing deeper into the lives and times of their friendship group and how things were back then. I bought one more coffee from the service station and an egg salad sandwich, tipping the adolescent waitress on my way out. I secured my seatbelt, inserted Georges Bizet's Carmen into my CD player, and smiled to myself. Tonight, I will be conquering the great British motorway system, similar to how Bellini's Norma conquered the whole of Europe. Chapter 3. Georges Bizet. Was it really by chance that Georges Bizet completed his first draft of Carmen in the summer of 1874? Did the summer not make it so? Georges could smell the oranges of Seville from his study just outside of Paris, perhaps even deeper primordial callings from the Chinese grapefruit of Southeast Asia, the oriental tones of the other in Carmen. Yet the Parisian suburbs of the 19th century, along with Bizet's decision to never write religious music again, 1858, filled his sense of Spain with wine, tobacco, blood, and lust. Georges followed his eyes as eagerly as he would his nose, tracing the iron piping of the Parisian sewer system, spanning miles and miles until one could hear the scurrying of rats. But then a few meters farther and his senses would enter the marketplace. The sound of a woman's heels, the new dresses being worn, beauty parading itself through the advent of the sewing machine and the new mechanical shoemakers. But the world just beyond Western Europe, this was what Bizet could feel too. Bizet, sitting in his study, let the whole world in, the exotic, the mystery, the fantasy, the danger, the traveling, the sexual license. A Middle Eastern woman somewhere in a dank tavern with her veils, jewels, bronzed beauty, and alluring dancing, the gypsies, the fishermen. On returning back to France from across the Mediterranean Sea via a leaping mullet, his mind wanders. His vision continues to travel along land until he is stunned by the many chunks of grass and soil that shoot out from the ground due to a kicking bull in distress slain by a sudden escotada, the thrust of a bullfighter's sword. All this in one moment, one breath, the unapproximated distance and presence of experience. Between the satellite image and the microscope, man was never endowed with the capacity to know how close or how far he was in relation to the universe. He would never be able to measure it, but only be able to record it. The two main characters in Carmen are stuck so intimately together that they cannot discern where one begins and the other ends. But the outside is always calling. Don Jose draws back from his embrace. He hears the trumpets calling the soldiers back to work. Everyone sooner or later hears the trumpets. Bizet's experience was never articulated, only perhaps expressed in the rising and falling of his notes. Influence may be charted, documented, and historicized, but inspiration is impossible to pin down. Our Western civilization has the profoundly banal ability to quantify the purely qualitative experience of life into galleries, museums, the paraphernalia of a culture that is always one step behind true experience. In the real world, Bizet died without true recognition, with an abscess in the windpipe, preoccupied by bouts of mental depression, doomed to become one of those indifferent, static objects included in the Grand Museum of Life. We should remember the leaping mullet, the escotada, and if you cannot remember, take a listen on your record player for yourself. Marie Callas encountered the ghost of Georges Bizet 91 years after his death, when she agreed to record the entirety of Karma in 1964. Of course, she had sang parts of Carmen before, a few preludes and habaneras here and there, but what does one brushstroke amount to in a Renoir? Bizet and Callas were brought together through circumstance, but there were more other salient connections. Both suffered deterioration of the lungs and throats. Both had similar mood swings. Both were destined to have a heart attack relatively young. You could say they were brought together by misfortune, and this was their own fortune. Champagne is also what connects Georges with Maria. Maria was extremely fond of champagne, and she would drink champagne in her intermissions, and of course at the fashionable Rome nightclub Circolo degli Scacchi. Georges Bizet's Los Toreadors would start playing at every major Formula One event alongside the spraying of champagne in the 1990s. It is raining. Maria Callas, the voice of imperfection, is singing Bizet's Carmen to herself softly through the streets of Paris, or is Carmen softly singing through Callas? She is meeting up with the general director of the next opera she is starring in. She has already decided that she will not like them. We are then transported into a split second where Maria thinks about her mother and sips her fourth cup of coffee. She was a prolific coffee drinker, too. Suddenly, she is on stage performing at the Paris Opera. Abruptly, she becomes exhausted. The tenor, noticing that Maria is tired, intentionally holds on to his notes longer than Maria can to hide her instability. By the end of the performance, when the curtains come down, Maria collapses and is carried unconscious to her dressing room. I am listening to Maria Callas sing Bizet's Carmen, driving through a world unknown to both of them. I think about Georges and Maria, and then Isabel, Benji, and even Professor James Macaulay. I think about how all these singular, unique lives traverse space and time and find a sanctuary in my fugitive soul through the magic of recorded sound and personal memory. The windshield wipers push the stubborn raindrops away as they assault my window. Were the wipers enthusiastic at first when the rain came down, eager at the task at hand? Had they since become bored, pushing the rain away with a sense of indifference? Another silly question of mine. The cement road keeps rolling underneath my car. Different lights from different places, moving through each other in all directions and dimensions, refractions of different signals passing through the interfaces of varying mediums, carrying information, momentarily caught in the waves of my car radio, the electric pylons in an adjacent field, the cables underneath. What a kingdom we have made. And all this contained within my atomistic little car. My solipsistic consciousness, traveling through the anxiety motorway of our age, driving into giant gaping dark tunnels, picking up a second skin of fear so pertinent in our life, which manifests as strange tics, stutters, reflexes. Yet I want something else. The desire to want to explode into white light upon everything and become so enthralled within a spectacle that I am the spectacle. To be right there on the head of a pin of a moment, mixed with all the blood, sweat, and tears the world can muster up. Warm floorboards, a sudden rise of laughter within me, alcohol rushing up toward the head and heart, allured, eager, anticipating. I feel this in me, and I feel it now in Maria Callas, Georges Bizet, Carmen, the production, the audience. I soak myself in the aura of geniuses. I want to be a human being, inspired. Chapter 4. James Macaulay. I woke up to the sound of dawn chorus. A chaffinch, maybe a tawny owl. It took me a while to register where I was and what personality Sam Wood was implicated in. I first appeared to be some neutral, indifferent human being. I could be any human, a stranger, simply a human gaze. And it was only when my human security system caught on that my subjectivity, and all the emotions that come with being a social subject, flooded back, giving me back my name, my past, and whatever bundle of feelings I had at my last recognizable instance, for better or for worse. A widow had lost her husband 5 years ago, and the painful memories when she realizes who she is and her unique predicament comes exactly 3 seconds after she wakes up every morning, and exactly 2 seconds after she has been distracted by anything powerful enough to engross her. A film, sex, a piece of music, a conversation with someone else, etc. The seductive lobotomy of oneself can be found within these encounters, these distractions. Yet I believe the same ambient moment can be found through a different aesthetic approach, focused outward upon the typically dull, boring objects of the everyday. This is the experience I was having at present in Boston, in Parks Court University car park at 6:15 a.m. I see many signs giving students and visitors directions to certain areas of the university. I see bins with keyholes in the back for when they need to be emptied and refilled again and again. I look at the perfect gravel around the edges of the car park. I wonder if the gravel was naturally formed through the erosion of rocks, or whether it was produced at a quarry near here, Boston's very own Bostonian gravel. I think about whether any of the materials that went into making this car park had been imported from other countries, whether this specific gravel was transported by mammoth trucks or carried across water. If water, then perhaps by a ferry floating along whilst crew members smoked cigarettes and talked about their families. Perhaps the gravel was found in a stream, a river, or a beach somewhere exotic. It is in these moments of insanely boring inquiry to some people where I find my inner peace. It is in the conversations and transportations of inanimate objects, embroiled in the human world of equipment that supports and actualizes them, where I find my solace. I look above, out through my windshield, and trace the base of a street light up towards its bulb, finding the markings of a brand embossed halfway up. I try and find stillness in the world and make that my hiding place. I find the serenity right in front of my eyes, like the cold light of day. I stop believing in depth and instead affirm the history of many surfaces, the narrative of every grain of sand. Can a man ever amount to the beauty of the things he sees and experiences? I have never moved forward. Instead, I dig my feet in or hide away whilst the river of time cascades all around and over me. I am the same as I was when I was 13, anxious and unable to comprehend the world. But at least there is always something new for my eyes to touch, and miraculously always some mutter of mine to keep me occupied. No longer than 30 seconds had passed since I had awoken, yet an incoming message noise bleeped and blipped on my phone. It was an email from our very own Professor James Macaulay. Dear Sam, if I may, what a coincidence that you should send me this email. I was just thinking about Ben the other day when passing the wine section in the supermarket. I have just returned from a conference on Carl Jung and synchronicity in Durham. No one knew what they were on about. Everyone appeared too modern and dull scientific to really get Jung. He was a mystic, don't you know? Yes, I thought of Ben back in the school days, his love of birds, the day he set fire to a tablecloth because he was bored of the conversation around it. I went to the supermarket on the way back from the Jung conference to get some bits in for me and Angela, and spotted a Heinrich Hartel, one of his favorite wines. On the label, a beautiful bird was depicted, flying off into some other representational dimension, whilst a table was laid and fully spread with wine, bread, cheese, and cold meats, all underneath this beautiful red Austrian tablecloth. Funny how all these elements came together in meaningful coincidence, isn't it? I shan't be of much help to you, I'm afraid. I knew Ben well at school, but it became very turbulent after that. Do you know that it was Ben who got me into all this synchronicity stuff? The first day I met him, I had been sent to wait in reception for my mother so that she could give me my school shoes, as I had worn my trainers to school. I had gotten away with it before. Half an hour passed. I don't think she really cared about it, and Ben walked in half asleep and was asked to sign in at reception and comment on why he was so late. Apparently, he had written that time was just a construct and cannot be measured absolutely. He must have been reading some crazy book that he had found in his dad's shed or something. Anyway, the next day the whole school knew about this comment, as it had circulated through the staff and then the students. He was sent to the headmaster's office, which was incredible enough, as the headmaster had time for nobody, especially students, and everyone was secretly waiting to see if Ben would come out alive. When his visit to the headmaster's office was over, I was one of the first people to ask him what had happened. He told me that the headmaster had poured him a nice cup of tea and had asked him what other theories he might have had about the nature of space-time. When I say our relationship had become turbulent, I really mean to say that I had fallen in love with him. When Ben was 16, he had bought this old beaten-up car, a rather ordinary-looking Renault Alliance, and most days from then on we would skip school and listen to radio shows in it, especially Just a Minute, or any opera we could get our hands on. He didn't have a license, so he would take a 4-minute drive in his car, kept in his parents' empty garage, to the nearest forest at about 5 a.m. every morning so that he wouldn't get caught out. I would catch a bus, the 151, to the nearest stop where Ben was, and we would share my packed lunch, and sometimes we'd get stoned. I remember the 151 days fondly. We had absolutely no guilt in skipping school or what our parents would think, or what anyone would think for that matter. We had somehow made our own world that just the two of us existed in, helped by the mundane verbal ambling of whomever was with us on the radio that day. We were never bored. Ben used to say that only boring people get bored. We felt as though it were our duty to sit and watch the world go by. What's the point of doing anything anyway, right? February crept in, and toward the end of that month there was a blizzard that covered the whole of our town in 6 inches of snow. I remember vividly standing outside Ben's car at an opening in the forest. I was catching snowflakes on my tongue whilst Ben tried to make a snowman. I remember asking him to see if he could catch the snowflakes on my tongue before they melted away. I encouraged him harder and harder to touch my tongue with his tongue. Ben knew at that moment what had happened, and he was so cool he didn't even act awkward about it. He just stopped responding to my pleas and went back into the car to listen to the radio. After that, things were never the same. To be honest, I'm glad they never were. He became distant from me and started hanging out with Brian soon after that. He was bad news, Brian. But I'm sure he'll have told you all about that. With no Benji, I started focusing my energy back on my studies at Long Sands Academy School. My brother told me that if you did well at school and got into college, you get to meet loads of girls at parties, and most of them put out, and you can listen to Led Zeppelin whenever you want. I wasn't too bothered about the girls' part, but Led Zeppelin is great. I scraped a pass in my psychology and religious studies lessons, but needed 3 passes to get into 6th form and then college. I needed to get out of my hometown, which for me was basically Benji town, and I just about started to realize that I wanted to be an academic. I remember going to school in order to collect my grades. I remember seeing that I had only passed 2 subjects, yet still heading to the assembly hall in order to enroll at 6th form. When the tutors saw that I had only 2 passes, I did what any independent 17-year-old would do. I burst into tears right there in the school assembly hall. After a minute of vacant professorial stares, Mrs. Saunders said that she would accept 2 passes if I performed in every school musical up until I graduated. Of course I accepted. What else is there to say? You don't want to hear about myself. You want to hear about Ben. Everyone wants to know about Ben. I met Angela in my 2nd year of college. She studied physics. We are now happily married, and at present she is studying the crystal structures and morphology of snowflakes. Yours sincerely, James Macaulay. P.S. Please forgive me. I am not against you visiting me, but I feel much more comfortable writing this kind of stuff to you. Writing is, after all, my vocation. In general, I feel more comfortable writing than talking, with my eye to the ground as opposed to the eyes of another in front of me reacting to every word that comes out of my mouth. I finished Professor Macaulay's email with a mixture of happiness and sadness. I was happy that I received his email. It meant that I was on the right track. Things were happening, and it would only be a matter of time until I could hunt down all the people, places, and experiences that made up Ben's life. I was sad, however, because I felt as though he had taken me down a dead end, closing all further correspondences that we could have had over a cup of coffee at his university, or maybe at the supermarket he had talked about. I could email him back, but I felt as though the concise tone of his email suggested that there was nothing more to be said. I felt as though he had spent the last 10 years getting over that Benji period in his life, and he had no desire to reflect further upon it at present, or ever again. Something was beginning to make sense, though. After the interrogation of Ben's suicide at the police station, no one tried to contact me, and I believe no one tried to contact one another. There were no tributes thrown for Benji over the last 2 years, and I feared that all of his so-called friends couldn't wait to see the back of him. Was Benji just a bad dream everyone wanted to forget about? Did they all conspire to drive him to death as an act of revenge for all the strange situations he had put them in? Either way, something wasn't right here. My opinion there and then was that Benji's allure was precisely that he could put people into difficult situations where they were forced to see themselves in a different light. Professor Macaulay may not want to revisit the past, but there was no doubt that he was in debt to Benji for teaching him a thing or two. Benji has had the same effect on me. His email has put me in a position where I have left my partner and taken to the open road in search of things I do not even know I'm looking for. At that moment, a million questions poured out of my mouth, present only to the inanimate objects within the confines of my car. What book did Benji borrow from his father in order to come up with such a philosophical excuse for his lack of punctuality at school? Who's Bad Brian? Did Benji continue skipping school after James soon saw sense and continued his studies? Who is Carl Jung? I looked at my phone and saw that I had a missed call from Isabel. All my prior duties as a loving boyfriend and as a denizen who participated in his society flooded back. I thought about all the objects in our house, the dead skin cells congealing on my guitar strings, the dust molecules multiplying on my record player needle, the spider who lives under the fourth shelf of my bookshelf, the photo of myself and Isabel on vacation in New York that falls off the fridge every time we close the freezer drawer, the 2 toothbrushes in the bathroom that always look like they are kissing each other, with their bristles touching and leaning on one another, leaving a strange milky residue inside the toothbrush pot. I decided to ring Isabel, forgetting about how early in the morning it was. After several rings, it went to voicemail, and so I left her a message. Isabel, surprise, it's me. I received a missed call from you. I hope you're okay. I hope the audition went well. I just realized that you can put bottles of red wine in the fridge without me being there to tell you off. If you like it cold, why don't you just drink rosé? Anyway, last night's performance was great, really interesting. A musician named James Macaulay, playing a mainly flamenco repertoire, some nice Paco de Lucia numbers, nice bit of Tarondo, very graceful. Wish you were here, really, Izzy. I'll call you again when I get a chance. Love you. Okay, bye. I hung up and placed my phone on the front passenger seat beside me. All this technology aiming to bring us together, to share an idea, experience, or memory within an instant, but really one is only left speaking to ghosts or simply themselves. I wondered how many people had been severely affected by friendship. For sure, we could all try and involve ourselves with the celestial rhythms of philosophical research, James, questions far more important than merely the world stage where we act out our own private and social dramas. But the encounter of a friend, one who you truly admire, this is an encounter very much like love, where you are left trying to reconcile this other with yourself and your own ideology. When this other is not reconciled, appropriated, or subordinated, then you are left with something common to all Benjamin's friends, a form of loathing. We all knew, or are beginning to realize, that Benjamin's essence, his being, if you will, brims with so much self-confidence and definiteness that it plays on the victim's mind. How dare he exist? Is he challenging me in some volatile manner? Of course, there are many people who purport to contain such a power, but are really at war with themselves and loathe themselves, but we are talking about a much higher being altogether, aren't we? I myself have no time for the former, unless they are enduring that painful process we have all been through called adolescence. I refreshed my inbox for any signs of life from the other 6 recipients of Benji's email. Nothing. To be fully aware of the myriad lives existing outside our own private existence is somewhat impossible. The idea is there, within stories, music, art, theater, the news, television programs, etc., but the experience is inaccessible. I know theoretically that Bad Brian, who I assume is the one and only Brian Rose, Terry Organ, Celine at Night, etc., are all with us. They are all living in their own world where their values seem more prominent because they are living through them and making them. Yet I can only ever think of such independent, sentient beings as characters in a story, pawns in a game, or at best, my ambivalent friends. What happens next in Sam Wood's story, I thought to myself. Long Sands Academy School was the answer. James was good enough to tell us the name of the school he and Benji had attended. The possibility of digging up old yearbooks, speaking to his old teachers if they were still there, if they were still alive, of walking down the same streets as Ben, of stopping and tying my shoelaces in the same spot, of walking past his house accidentally, of finding these woods that James talked about, that was enough for me to go on for sure. I turned on my laptop and found only one Long Sands Academy School, located in St. Knots, Cambridgeshire. This had to be the place. It was the sixth form as well. It taught all the subjects James studied. And, without sounding too much like James, there was a strange synchronicity here. The school's 4 houses were named Rutherford, Moore, Eliot, and Britton, after Ernest Rutherford, Henry Moore, Thomas Stearns Eliot, and Benjamin Britten. Benjamin Britten and his music were a topic Benjamin, my Benjamin, and I talked about obsessively when we were not embroiled in difficult guitar techniques. Note, Benjamin Britten's string quartets 2 and 3 are definitely worth listening to if you haven't already. In this new opening in the Benjamin Flu story, I couldn't help but let out a short laugh. Cambridge would take at least 2 hours from Boston. So what else to do but temporarily block out the classical guitar motifs playing around in my head and put on the sunlit perfection of Bocchinieri. Chapter 5. Luigi Boccherini. Luigi Boccherini, one of chamber music's most important composer, known for his lavishly woven repeated musical cycles and noble tastes, died in poverty on 28th May 1805 in Spain and was buried in a pauper's grave. Before his own departure, he had lived through many deaths in his family: the death of his father, 1785, 2 wives, 1785 and 1805, and his daughters, 1796, 1802, and 1804. During Boccherini's last months of near-fatal collapses owing to long-standing respiratory ailment, did he still smile at the thought of his extravagant and lush virtuoso musical pieces? Of course he did. The same pieces were gyrating in Benito Mussolini's head when he repatriated Boccherini's remains in 1927 out of sheer adoration and respect for him. Escape seemed to be all the rage for the men that were to play a significant role in Boccherini's legacy. Mussolini and his wife fled Milan on April 25, 1945, on a boat attempting to push through to the Swiss border. Lucien Bonaparte, an enthusiastic patron of Boccherini, was forever running away from his brother Napoleon. Francisco Goya, too a friend of Boccherini's, fled to Bordeaux to escape the political and social trends of the time. Everyone else wanted to be elsewhere, but Boccherini was quite content to be left in Spain in a wooden box within St. Michael's Basilica Church of Madrid. I wonder if Mussolini, on moving Boccherini's body, had a premonition of his own fate on that strange day in April 1945. Being captured at sea near the village of Donga on Lake Como, being shot the following afternoon, 2 days before Adolf Hitler's suicide, and finally being hung upside down from a metal girder above a service station to crowds hurling insults and physical abuse. Perhaps Mussolini had read what Boccherini had written on the 8th July 1799, "The composer achieves nothing without executants," and had taken it upon himself to execute the task of transporting his remains. Boccherini continued to write, "These must be well disposed toward the author," and in Mussolini's eyes, he was definitely being well disposed. In 1993, rising moisture in the burial vault at the Chiesa de San Francisco in Lucca necessitated the exhumation of Boccherini's corpse. A team of medical examiners at the University of Pisa performed a paleopathological autopsy on the body and found that he had tuberculosis, an apparent catalyst for extreme bouts of melancholy. The almost mummified corpse was 1.65 meters tall and riddled with arthritis. Boccherini's teeth had completely fallen out, suggesting that he had neglected oral hygiene. His left forearm and left scapular truss showed muscular insertions stronger than those on the right. Boccherini was not a left-handed individual, however, and such a muscle buildup may have been caused by chronic masturbation. Benjamin Rush, renowned physician and signer of the Declaration of Independence, argued that masturbation was a direct cause for tuberculosis, memory loss, and epilepsy, but this connection has also been famously reversed by Freud. The melancholic or neurotic individual uses masturbation to release general tension, stress, along with normal and healthy sexual tension, calling such psychic tension. On the other hand, we could simply say that such buildup of muscle tissue is derived from an unnatural conformation of the cello. The challenging posture and arm positions needed for shifts in composition, we seem to only remember Boccherini as the great virtuoso composer and not the great virtuoso cellist. The repetitious actions inflicted upon Boccherini's body, repatriation, autopsy, etc., reflect those subtle repetitions he perfected in his music. If perfection can be attained at all, then one must wish for it to be repeated eternally. As Nietzsche once wrote, all joy wants eternity. To strive for joy sounds like such an empty, generic activity in our day and age, yet it is essential for those troubled and gifted people who were stuck with intense brain activity, flights of depression, or serious physical and physiological illness. It was a matter of attaining joy in order to stay alive. From Boccherini to Bizet, Nietzsche to Nijinsky, the goal was to avoid solipsism and engage in sympathetic vibration, the awareness of oneself responding to external vibrations to which one has a harmonic likeness. Through music, writing, walking, painting, the solipsistic neurotic could finally feel some sense of the other in harmony, the reciprocation of opposites or the awareness of a larger composition, and on his own terms, too. Of course, there were and are many carnal activities which succeed in dragging the solipsistic mind kicking and screaming from out of its crypt: war, disease, political upheaval, sex, etc., but such activities, however turbulent, never touched the heart of the above individuals. As Boccherini once said, "I know that music is made to speak to the heart of man, and this is the effect that I aim at producing, if it lies within my power." One could say that Boccherini was not the right type of person to get tuberculosis, not that anyone should get it really. The high incidence of consumption in the poorest, most densely populated cities made the disease common, and Boccherini was, by all standards, noble. In some cases, however, consumption among the middle classes could be read as evidence of that particular individual's creative and artistic nature. This transparency of the inner and outer, this transformation of the melancholy soul into the boils, blisters, and pale invalidism of one's external profile may seem fitting for most of Romanticism's tenets, but surely not for the one and only Boccherini. Can one imagine Boccherini spitting blood into his handkerchief while composing Minuet from String Quintet Opus 11, number 5? Chapter 6. Brian Rose. Hi, Sam. I'm in Butlins. I'm in fucking Butlins. Thank God I brought my hip flask, the one that Benjamin liked with the little Indian on it playing the panpipes. I managed to sneak to the toilet, taking a few little Indian sips between each new box of variety pack cereals Jan's kids devour. Jan's my new partner. She has a good heart with 2 feet firmly on the ground. That's the kind of woman I need. Not too sure I need 2 little rotters, though. If Ben could see me now, sniffing around for quiet trails behind the backs of shallots, hanging around the sissy rides late at night to gather my thoughts, it's not that there's nothing to do around here, it's that it's too claustrophobic, too obnoxious. Every thought I have here is a Butlins thought. Everything is either exhilarating or not, as if one's experience could be portioned out through the length of a roller coaster ride. Everything here is electrically powered, but it doesn't feel electric to me. There's no room for quiet revelry, no red wine depths to fall into, what with all the harsh primary colors and two-dimensional surfaces. But hey, this is a middle-class type of whining, and my girl, my love, is a 21st century kind of love. Anyway, Ben. I left him a flower not long ago on www.findagrave.com. I placed 1 pink carnation symbolizing gratitude and 1 zinnia bush with blue flowers symbolizing thoughts of friends upon the page where I found his memorial profile. You can upload images of flowers to the site. Everyone who has ever lived and died on the face of this planet can be found on that site. and all sorts of things can be shared and talked about. Looks like there is such a thing as digital death after all, and life. It's difficult for me to do much more for Ben, to be honest, or for anyone for that matter. It took me 5 minutes to limp into this toilet cubicle. Ever since I was diagnosed with compartment syndrome some 20-odd years ago, I've had to forego grandiose trips to see friends over the country. I've had to stop listening to my spontaneous impulses, but I'm probably healthier because of it. I've always thought since the incident that the internet was especially made for guys like me. We may not be able to move much, but we can check the football scores and racing results. We can play a pretty good game of 8-ball pool online, and I can speak to you right now, wherever you may be. Ben is partly to be blamed for my disease, but I really don't hold an ounce of remorse or bitterness toward him. We were both as fucked up as each other. Benji was the only guy I knew who went his own way. I would have bumped into him sooner at school, but he was never there. I would stay in the school toilets after break and lunch, writing iconoclastic quotes I had found from books in the library, scribbling them on the bathroom tiles while smoking cigarettes. He was somewhere else in his car. The woods off Tosland Road, I heard. The only 17-year-old kid who knew the difference between La Boheme and Tosca. Seriously. I eventually plucked up the courage to speak to him one evening on the road outside of our school. He was sticking some flyer to the side of a bus shelter. I stood behind him and looked as intrigued as I could to get his attention. It was this crazy photocopied flyer he had made with pictures of snakes eating their own tails and strange symbols. It was a flyer inviting people to a secret club where alternative music, arts, and rituals are encouraged and practiced. I think those were his words. I remember going to the first one at the back of a disused furniture warehouse. It was just the two of us, but he didn't seem to mind. We talked about everything and anything, and later that week he made me a mixtape of all the weird ritualistic music with some jazz, Coltrane, and classical, mainly Berlioz, mixed in. I didn't like the music that much, but I think of that tape all the time. Back in the day, whatever that means, it was real difficult to get your hands on anything that wasn't Duran Duran. There was real labor in convincing the only local record store manager to order in alternative zines, magazines, like Left Shadows, Smokescreen, Two Triangles, and Tedium Medium. Sometimes Ben would ask this Japanese kid at school, Kai, to order in some poetry canto through his mum back home in Kyoto. I remember one long weekend in summer we would cycle around near the outskirts of our town, knocking on people's doors, asking if they had any old records, 78s, 33s, 45s, whatever. We'd find damp piles in the corners of garages, old 78s slotted in between drinking cabinets, and scratched 45s nails to ceilings and walls. Back then it really was a vocation to be an open-minded enthusiast of whatever scraps of counterculture one could find. Anyway, we seemed to openly provoke each other further and further down the rabbit hole into all things weird and not so wonderful, until one night we stole a bottle of my mother's Pimm's and decided that we should kill ourselves. He would stab me and I would stab him in some reciprocal act of tragic trust. We met outside Kingfisher Church and stood in front of each other for about half an hour, egging one another on, convincing each other that the world was not a beautiful place, and that we would both be reincarnated as eagles, and that if we ever flew past each other, we would simply acknowledge each other and fly on by. The time had come. We counted down from 10, 9, 8, but on the last second I chickened out. I wasn't too sure I wanted to be an eagle. But Ben had already stuck the knife in straight into my upper left thigh. I remember howling, falling to the floor, and Benji just walking away. He didn't even ring the ambulance. Someone told me a month later in school that afterwards he walked to the bottom of the street and bought a takeaway pizza. A fucking takeaway pizza. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks, and that's where they told me I had compartment syndrome. There was no blood flowing through the leg, and my thigh muscles all seized up completely. I didn't speak to him much after that. That's just the way things go sometimes. I still think of him in certain scenarios, as if he's there with me. Ironic, really, that after school I opened up a shoe shop, even though I could barely move my own feet. What do I do now, you ask me? I get a taxi every fortnight up to the benefits office to check in and receive my benefits for my leg, and then a taxi back to my home next to the sea where I listen to records and drink far too much and wake up hungover and reach for coffee and look out upon the shoreline and occasionally think of eagles. Best wishes, Brian Rose. I returned back to the car positioned a few streets down from Long Sands Academy School, sat down and thought about the message Brian had sent me. Of all the things he spoke about, I couldn't help but repeat the line about electricity in my head. Everything here is electrically powered, but it doesn't feel electric to me. I felt like I had caught some meaning here. When something has electricity, it is meant to be exciting, but now it's the opposite. I look around and every room in every house is lit with this accompanying low, dull hum. Something is on, but nothing is going on. I guess Brian and Benji would still have been kind of dumbfounded by electricity. They maybe had a television, but I bet it would have felt like some kind of strange, mind-numbing portal to them. From everything I had learnt about Benji, he seemed to adamantly boycott it, to always want to be out, walking around in parking lots, exploring. Lights that comforted were boring to him, yet lights that blinked, blipped, and traveled suggested something altogether different, something mysterious, even futuristic. Yes, he listened to classical music in his car, but I feel as though this were some kind of metaphysical sanctuary he could escape into. Where else could he listen to his favorite classical pieces on full volume? With every new flyer that he had got photocopied from the local newsagents, with every new compilation tape he meticulously recorded for somebody, some sense of electricity must have passed through his body, and not the type of electricity that generated his family's toaster. Emotions and technology somehow coalesced and communicated with Benji as if some form of spirit or phantasm. And what about that other kind of electricity, the electricity of memory? What about the memory that makes your heart pang, your leg bleed, the memory of the little Indian hip flask? All of these sensations seem to get lost to everyone but the people that were there at that particular time. It wouldn't be able to conduct electricity for 12,000 houses, but it would be able to make all the hairs on your neck stand up or keep Brian listening to records late at night searching for something. Maybe Brian likes the internet so much because he doesn't make his life depend on it. He kind of talks about it as if it were this neat little thing, not the overpowering subculture that implicates all forms of daily life. I think it's because he knows its limits. If Brian wanted to find out what happened to him on Friday, 12th, 1995, he wouldn't be able to scroll back on his Facebook archive or find it through Google. In many scenarios, at least back in Brian's and Benji's adolescent days, there wouldn't have even been a photograph of something or other. Could they afford cameras? And would they even think about trying to take a photo of something as magical as lived experience, or as prosaic as a night down at the local pub, breaking into an old sweetie shop with a broken bollard? For Benji and Brian, if you wanted a snapshot of something that meant something to your life, you would have to take that walk down Cross Hall Road, past the back of St. Neot's Golf Club, to that bench where you etched your initials of yourself and Heather Hamilton, forever, if destroyed, even truer. Isabel had sent me a message. It read, "Audition went okay-ish. Loads of people drink red refrigerated. Do you not know Eric Asimov? Ha ha! No, you don't. But I don't know who invented the guitar, or what Tarondo means. Hope you enjoyed James Macaulay. He sounds better than you. Smiley face. Kisses." I couldn't help but think of her now, Isabel. Her body, her hair, her laugh, the way she sits on the floor back in our flat and starts spontaneously stretching. To be with a dancer, there is nothing better. And what a beautiful message. It shows me that not all the world is thinking and rethinking the many antimonies of life, friendship, Benjamin Flew. The softness of her is worlds apart from all the cold British distance I have placed between her and I. The indifference of motorways, the indifference of bricks piled up on top of each other with mortar, the distance, or perhaps more accurately, the difference between my car and Long Sands Academy School, my crumpled mat, and the empty cardboard cup of coffee left over from yesterday. Should I drive back now into those arms? Should I forget with her and live in a comfortable dream? But am I not dreaming now? I have spent these last days with ghosts, George Bizet, Luigi Boccherini, and now my friends, James and Brian, even Jan and her kids. I did walk into Long Sands Academy. I walked straight in with some half-thought-up plan. I was to ask the person at reception if anyone could help me ascertain information about Benjamin Flew, that I was writing a book about him, and that I would be promoting the school along with my findings. Perhaps I could have talked to the headmaster who invited Benji in for a cup of tea and a discussion on space-time. Perhaps I could have visited the toilets where Brian had hidden away smoking cigarettes, thinking thoughts. However, none of that had happened. I walked in to find the reception busy talking to someone else. I moseyed over to the wall full of hanging photographs and searched for Benji et al. Yes, the words, "What the fuck am I doing here?" had passed my mind once or twice whilst pursuing the rows of schoolgirls and schoolboys fixed eternally onto light-sensitive paper. Every child could have been Benjamin Flew, apart from those children that grinned widely. But even then, one could imagine Ben in a certain scenario doing this. For some reason, my eyes started drifting upward toward the saturated skies in the photographs. Why did I feel as though Ben was up there and not embodied down below? I realized then and there that I had no desire to talk to anyone about Benjamin apart from those 7 other humans that will take his email with them to their graves. I felt a sudden sense of disgust at all other forms of life that were not directly implicated in the Benjamin Flew story. They had not been chosen for such a task. They were different from me, from us. I walked out of the school, back to the car, and that's when I received Isabel's message. What next? Did I really want to continue this dreary journey, sleeping in my car, waking up on some different avenue, close or drive? I wanted to have fun on this trip. I decided I would stop off at a nice hotel in the area and relax. Drink a bottle or 2 of wine, remind myself of those haunting, otherworldly melodies embedded in the best classical music, and gaze out upon the mysterious openness of a night sky. I would try to imagine all the evenings that have ever been. The evening before the Battle of Thermopylae, 480 B.C., the evening of the 31st, January 1606, when John Johnson Guy Fawkes fell to his death, his lifeless body quartered and distributed to the 4 corners of the kingdom. Wherever you are and whatever you are doing, the sheer weight of history will always find you. In a nightingale's song somewhere in the distance, in a stone stuck in your shoe, in fine soil and dust particles that move past your vision on a hot summer's day. To think of all of the people that have sat where you are sat, the environment slowly shifting and marking new experiences, this could keep me glued to the very same chair forever, forever pondering. I have never felt more myself than with my memories and imagination. But the game is not up yet. Brian had told us about a certain Toslin road that would lead us to the very same spot where Benjamin had spent all those mornings, afternoons, and evenings in his car, meditating on his own memories and imagination. I needed to go there first, and the wine could wait. A few seconds on Google Maps, and I had found the road, and, I think, the correct turning where a wooded spot nestled between 2 rough grazing plots. That had to be the place. I didn't know what I was going to do once I got there, but I wanted to get there at least. I also decided to do something rather impulsive. I attached all of the recipients that had received Benjamin's tragic email and wrote a quick sentence that would find its way to all of them with one click of a button. It read, "Sam here. Thanks to everyone that has found the time to get back to me. Currently at Ben's breeding ground, St. Neot, Cambridgeshire. Anyone who feels like a reunion, you know where to find me. Best." I pressed send and exerted one last bit of energy in order to get the car started. I checked the rearview mirrors and swiftly put Purcell's Fantasius into the CD player. Chapter 7. Henry Purcell. In the midst of history and the historical perspective, if one looks hard enough, one will always find an anomaly. Henry Purcell, the most profound of all English composers, musician of the Restoration period, optimist of London, with its new society prototypical of the continentalism and wealth we find in London today, found a quiet space to look back. Of course, like Mendelssohn after him, this looking back displayed more of a magical past than that of a real one. Mendelssohn's encounter with Scotland is indeed magical. What did Purcell do? Amongst all the pompous petitions requested by Charles II, James II, and Queen Mary, he found time to open up an old dusty chest of viols. The viola da gamba was on the decline shortly after the huge success of the violin. But Purcell had unfinished business with this slow and sturdy creature, with strings made of gut that whispered something Tudor about it, and a craftsmanship that found its origin in Belgium, yet its technique in the Jews of northern Italy. Even the notion of consort, ensemble, began to acquire connotations anathema to the intellectual characteristic that classical music took on around Purcell's time. The consort made music a group activity for courts and households, which then became a domestic activity. Children learnt simple songs on it at home, sometimes with the hope of putting on plays at functions. The consort was entertainment. However, it was the consort of the viola that really cemented this attitude. Even the idea that choristers learnt how to read music with a viola put certain virtuosos off. Nevertheless, Purcell persisted with both the consort and the viola. One imagines Purcell looking out from his window on Bowling Alley, East Street, catching the spires of Westminster Abbey through the curtains. What is he thinking? Can he hear young William Byrd's voice resound still, a chorister of Westminster Abbey all those years back? Is he overcome by a desire to continue the lineage of viola consort music? Chipped Gothic features, rain-worn walls, leaves blown on the breath of God. Whatever that constant unknowing was that gave rise to his pensiveness, it came out in his fantasias. Of course, Byrd had his fantasias, but Purcell turned the continuous harmony of notes into cyclical, contrapuntal Baroque folds. The thousand folds of musical garments drooping, crossing, mirroring, and these very same folds also became the folds of the psyche, the folding of the private experience of sound with that of the public experience, and also that of the introspective musician with that of the gregarious musician. Purcell's composition is the fantasia of the mind, with all its contradictions and taboos. It is even the fancy of the young Purcell allured by alcohol and women amongst the squalor of London and its charred backdrop. Yes, Purcell could drink with the best of them, raising and clunking tankards next to the open fireplaces, dark wooden beams, and low ceilings of the many labyrinthine pubs of a post-1666 London, immersed in spittled joyous song. Come, come, let us drink. 'Tis in vain to think like fools on grief or sadness. Let our money fly and our sorrows die, all worldly care is madness. But wine and good cheer will, in spite of our fear, inspire our hearts with mirth, boys. The time we live, to wine let us give, since all must turn to earth, boys. Hand about the bowl, ye delight of my soul, and to my hand commend it. A fig for chink 'twas made to buy drink, and before we go hence, we'll spend it. It was this distillation, the sweetness of English eccentricity, wit, and lightness, with a difficult Gothic backdrop full of darkness and sorrow, that would later be defined as the misunderstood British tradition. That particular drinking song by Purcell, Come Let Us Drink, composed of many canons expressing the persistent repetitions of rebuilding and restoring London's city streets, the insistent lengthy litanies of royal inaugurations, yet also the vulnerable repetitions of the blackbird, starling, nightingale, and crow in its natural habitat, endlessly calling out, only half aware of the imminent natural catastrophe advancing. Flood, plague, fire, war. Purcell's fantasias foresaw the emerging twists and turns of a new world similar to how Carl Jung, 300 years later, on a transatlantic liner to America with a certain Sigmund Freud, foresaw the darkness of the Great War. Jung overlooked the vast ocean with a thought that would haunt him to his death. In October 1913, while I was on a journey, I was suddenly seized by an overpowering vision. I saw a monstrous flood covering all the northern and low-lying areas between the North Sea and the Alps. When it came up to Switzerland, I saw that the mountains grew higher and higher to protect our country. I realized that a frightful catastrophe was in progress. I saw the mighty yellow waves, the floating rubble of civilization, and the drowned bodies of uncounted thousands. Then the whole sea turned to blood. This vision lasted about 1 hour. I was perplexed and nauseated and ashamed of my weakness. In the mid-17th century, whilst Purcell's darker side was preoccupied by the incandescence of mystery found in English forests, the famous philosopher John Locke suggested that the forest was off bounds. A human can only perceive qualities of the tree such as color, shape, and size. The tree beyond perception would have to be left to the skeptics and mystics. I wonder if Locke's discovery was simultaneously Purcell's nagging mystical obsession. If we can't get to the tree, then maybe the music can. Henry Purcell continued to think about nature and William Byrd and Thomas Tallis and all those old heroes of the English tradition and all the shadows of ruin that resisted being known in an increasingly knowledgeable epoch. One evening, after a few too many ales at his local tavern, Purcell walked back home through his cherished city of London, across the Thames and through Westminster. He smiled at all the mystery of the world in that drunken, half-jovial state we all know so well in this era. He finally appeared at his door on Bowling Alley, East Street, and gave it a knock. What then happened, which is now famously documented, is that his wife refused to let him in on account of his current state of intoxication. He was left, then, to walk the streets of London in the cold and rain. He subsequently caught a chill, which led to his death at the age of 35. I reached the wooded area just off Tosland Road, where Ben spent most of his mornings, afternoons, and evenings either with James or in total solitude. I had somehow managed to get out of my car and was already deep within the woodland. Acorns crunched beneath my trainers, and a thick blanket of sound, the white noise of nature, descended on me like a bedsheet that dressed me as if I were a ghost at a Halloween party. I could feel my untied shoelaces dragging across the dry leaves, but I did nothing about it. I walked between the trees for hours, perhaps circling myself many times. There was no Isabel, no Mum or Dad, no thoughts that were not applied to the present, to sight, sound, touch. I had only felt this sense of the present once before, when I had attempted to walk from London to Lincoln on a beautiful summer's evening in order to attend my sister's wedding. I could not afford a train ticket, so I tried to walk. I got as far as St. Albans, where the motorway made it impossible for me to walk beside it. I climbed into a large nest of bramble, where I was scratched many times, foraging through natural tunnels, not knowing where I would end up. That was the first time that I encountered nature as a cruel thing, an obstacle. Yet here I was, free to walk the open forest, picking up glimmers of stars and passing car headlights in the distance. All the evening calls of birds and owls turned into curious murmurs made by Benji. I was listening hard to them, but I could not find him. Sometimes his voice became playful, even sarcastic, and at other times deadly serious and somber. "I can't see you, Benji," I would shout out every few seconds. Is there no possibility that Benji could be incarnated as these sounds? As a tawny owl, a nightjar, deep in the trunk of an old big-belly oak? Is there a way that by me simply thinking about him, his spirit manifests and joins the world of animated life? I felt as though I had walked for days on end, yet the time, evening, had stayed the same, and the same voices of animals and insects were talking to me, repeating something that I could not understand. Finally, a harsh light targeted a tree in the distance. I walked slowly up to it and tried not to breathe. I arrived at the foot of its stump and became drenched in the very same harsh light. I turned to the light and found that it had come from the headlights of an old Renault Alliance. It was Benji's car, with the driver's seat door swung ajar just as he used to have it. The motor was running. Just as I was about to run to the car, I turned to the tree stump and saw Benjamin Flew. He was half buried and half rotten, but I knew that it was him. His face looked like the face of the moon, cold, stony, and withered, yet full of mystery. Who had done this to him? Was it James or Brian? Did he come here to die quietly after sending that message? Every background sound suddenly came to the fore and reverberated from the many conclaves of Benjamin's swollen face. Louder and louder the sounds grew until they deafened me, and I appeared like Edvard Munch's scream of nature with both hands clasped to my own skull, now withering away and disappearing into the night sky and farther between the spaces of burning stars. I awoke to the last passage of Purcell's Fantasias. It took me a second to realize where I was and why I was there. I must have dozed off somehow after reaching Toslin Wood. I took a sip of coffee from a 2-day-old cardboard cup and lit a cigarette. I took a good look at my surroundings from inside my car. Well, it doesn't look that interesting to me, I said to myself, and there's no snow this time, James. I got out of the car, leaving the door open to let out all the smoke. It was getting cold, so I left my motor running and walked out into the wood. I had absolutely nothing to go on. I wished there and then that I had a metal detector, and that maybe I could go out searching for misplaced coins and lighters that Benji once had and lost. I walked round the wood 1,000 times, just walking, not really thinking. I knew that this was the denouement, the moment where everything was meant to come together. But like many things in life, nothing had transpired. No hidden meaning was revealed, and no resolution had made itself known to me. I returned back to the car and lit another cigarette. Why hadn't Isabel messaged me more? Usually she would say that she missed me. She would ask for me to come home, or ask, "Where have you been?" Is she in love with someone else? Is that it? Sam the eccentric has gone off to his studies, and now she was left to relive those halcyon days where she was free to do her makeup perfectly for 3 hours and receive the attention that she had only procured when we had first started dating? I pick up the phone and give her a ring. 1 ring. 2 rings. 3 rings. 4 rings. It goes to her voicemail. I decide to say something. Isabel, I'm sure you're missing me lots and can't bear to be without me. I watched a great performance today. Mr. Rose performed some pieces of Purcell and Boccherini. We were out in this beautiful open space in Cambridgeshire, and we are now retiring to the nearest pub to talk music and the fate of the century. Something hit me abruptly as I was leaving this message for Isabel. Who am I, and why am I saying these words? It suddenly came to my attention that every being that has ever lived on the face of this planet has always had some inclination or other, some form of personality. Why do I speak this way, in this tone? Why the defensive, sarcastic attitude? Why the lies? Why the need to uphold my status in conjunction with music and the intellectual? We are all born with a mind and a body which quickly learns the flaws and foibles of subjectivity, with desires and prejudices, with parts that are conditioned and parts that break away from the mold. Not only is there history in that tree over there, but in Benjamin Flew, there is also a history of the self, of consciousness, of emotion. Does culture make us this way, so self-invested? It would be so easy, alternatively, to simply say that I exist and that I will die, and that this acknowledgement of death propels me to search for signs of life that prosper, to feel pain at signs that do not, to try and love, because love is surely a wonderful thing, better than sports cars or mansions, better than television programs and new clothes, better than money and restaurants. I realize that I have said nothing for several seconds on the phone. Minor notes sustain. The world tries to stay the same, but is disregarded and overturned by change. Someone is being sick from too much alcohol. Someone is angry and wants to fight someone. Someone makes love to another, but is really making love to themselves. Someone has lost a daddy. Someone is about to die in their sleep. Rain starts to fall. I love you, Isabel. I hang up and find that I have a message from a Terry Organ. Chapter 8. Terry Organ. Sam, I know it's late, or early, depending on which way you look at it. Well, I imagine it must be, as I have just woken up. To be honest, I am quite astonished that I have crawled all the way from the bathroom floor to the desk in my conservatory. If I had stayed in the bathroom any longer, I would have probably been sick on myself like yesterday. And maybe the day before that. Can't remember. Don't mind me. I'm just indulging in all my free time. When one starts to get lashings of time, one doesn't really know what to do with it. One is startled by it. Like all that excess energy a pet rat generates when it is touched by its owner, worrying itself into complete fatigue. That's me. Recently I have picked up this faint ringing in my left ear as if I had just finished watching a rock concert or something. It will get worse and worse, louder and louder, until eventually I will be but a single carnal note powerless to the melody that plays me. Or even worse, I will be an eternally hesitant frequency in between car radio stations. I'm not sure what I meant to do with all this time. I wonder, would it be easier if I were a mayfly? I sometimes wish I were. To suddenly be alive as if it were a miracle, to make love and dance on all available surfaces, to live by the rising and setting of the sun, to float on the cool breeze of an ending day, an ending life, to be so intimately bound to both life and death that you are somehow both at the same time. When I drink, I feel as though I have an affinity for such ephemeral creatures. I attempt to get so drunk that I reach a stage where full life and intensity rush through me as though they were divine inspiration. Although I have completely collapsed by this time, my heart surges and every element of the world shows itself to me. Old songs come to me, and I sing them out loud with such passion I sometimes begin to cry. I am disabled by alcohol, yet my mind is free to collect every experience I have ever had. Sometimes Benjamin passes through. At times I barely acknowledge him, but at others I focus all my energy on him, his scent, his smile, his voice, his eyes, his wit, the way he escapes everything whilst still being present to all those around him. We killed him, don't you know? Yes, we killed him by not trying to understand him, by projecting our misplaced desire for reciprocal validation upon him. He was a man of holy ideas. He was servant to them. Love, art, grace, the unknown. Yet he lived in a world, in a time and place that desecrated such ideas. I'm surprised we're all still going. I'm surprised we haven't noticed. Love lost to a one-night stand. Art lost to the new harbingers that proclaimed what was deemed worthy and what was deemed irrelevant. Genuine art never wanted to be worthy. Grace lost to the continual openness and shallowness of manufactured desire and its denizens. There are no secrets anymore, apart from the human race, which is God's little humiliating secret. I have never ever enjoyed another man's company apart from that of Benjamin Flew's. Everyone else is looking forward to what they will be eating for dinner. Everyone else is chit-chatting. My dead Benjamin, my dead God, manifests himself as wine now. Thank God that in a world full of mess we have the vine to suckle from. It is much more complex than this, though. Let us suggest that there is such a thing as a good musician and a bad one, a good painter and a bad one. Then this truth continues with forms of intoxication. There is a good drunk and a very bad insipid one. This comes in two stages, the harmony and the action. To encounter good alcohol, one must first understand that one is opening their body to a stimulant that will transform them. The first step is to find what drink whispers to you, what drink fills you in a harmonious fashion, what drink finds you as much comfort in the depths of your belly as you do with its complex effects. Then, once the bond has been made, an ethics of being drunk ensues. What type of drunk shall I be? Now, we do not want a drunk who uses alcohol to block out constructed insecurities, to nullify themselves to the point that they desire to hurt someone or display primitive, lustful, and meaningless penetration. Alcohol can't change what you need to change yourself. Only the most rounded man or woman can take on the subtle demands of intoxication and develop it further. The act is, in a sense, the act of death. The reason why an insect lies on its back is because it has reached a point of fatal relaxation where it loses all its tension of muscles. The same decision, to relax and find a place to die, is found in the place to go when drunk. I have chosen the bathroom, and I have chosen the method of reminiscence. It was wine that introduced me to Benjamin in the first place. We met at a wine tasting in Tunz. There were 50 wines to taste, and I had barely got through 5 when I saw Benjamin beside me. I asked him which wine he was enjoying, and his response was thus: "Everyone is telling me where these wines came from, who made them, what process, but I just want to talk about the experience of drinking them. In fact, I would rather sit down with one bottle and try and understand that one, rather than hopping about the place looking for the next sensation." Benjamin taught me that drinking a bottle of wine is like babysitting, but you're never quite sure who's the baby and who's the sitter. After that wine-tasting evening, we spent many nights drinking together. In the beginning, we both learnt how to drink alone in solitude, but eventually we would both participate in the ritual of drunkenness in the same room. Sometimes we would not speak the whole night, but it was comforting knowing that he was in the other corner babysitting wine. We had arranged for another babysitting one night, but he never showed, and I never saw him again. I even buy the bottles he used to purchase just to be with him. I hope this helps Sam. From now on, I will be a solitary drinker, but no one ever dies with someone, so I find some solace in that. Best, Terry. I tried to ignore Terry's message at first. I wasn't in the mood for ruminating on the essence of wine, nor lost images of Benji. It was a beautiful message indeed, and I felt, just like with the other emails, that I had got to understand something fundamental about one of Benji's friends. But yet again I had failed to gain any detailed insight into Benji himself. On the other hand, maybe I had gained everything I needed. High school rebel, classical music enthusiast, fan of anything from the avant-garde, big wine drinker, secretive man. But these interests do not add up to a total personality. I do not know how he would react to certain things. For example, my mission to recover his name from the scrap heap of history and forgetting. I do not know how his warm embrace would feel, nor all those qualities that Terry would recollect drunk on his bathroom floor. Brian, too, was in the lavatory when he wrote his email to me. Perhaps the entire world is hiding in a lavatory somewhere. And far from us killing him with our barbaric ways, maybe it was Benjamin's existence that killed everyone close to him. James, the closet homosexual. Brian, the unsettled middle-aged man somewhere in Butlins with 2 children and Jan. Terry, the alcoholic and melancholic. And finally Sam, the guitar tutor with 300 pounds to his name and a beat-up car. I was ready for that drink, so I drove to the closest supermarket and bought 2 of Benji's favorite bottles of Heinrich Hartl and a pack of cigarettes. I booked myself a room online at the nearest hotel, the Eaton Oak, which, after confirmation, came with a reminder notice. Those who fail to return to their rooms before midnight will have to access their key at the open reception, where you will find a locker with your room number on it. Please enter your one-time key code 1569 to find your room key. Please leave the key with the reception any time before 11 a.m. the following day. What if, and here's a weird one, the recipients that had replied to me were not really Benjamin's friends at all? Emails can be hacked. A close friend or lover may be occupying themselves with messages that are not for them. What if I had entered into a slow game of idle curiosity, a slow game played by bored people? I have a feeling that no one else will reply to me now, factual or fiction. I mean, who is Celine at night? Who really is Celine at night? I imagine that people would be reserving their energy for more pertinent questions like, what are the fundamental constituents of reality? Are synthetic a priori truths possible? How is infinity disclosed in mathematical set theory, etc.? But I just want to know who Celine at night is. I unscrewed the cap of my first Heinrich Hartel and took a few sips. Bizet, Boccherini, and Purcell were all persistently whirring in my melodic memory. So I decided to listen to something different, something even hotter and drier, something as precise as a finger hammering down on a single note. I slid Leo Brouwer into the CD player and let my bottle of wine babysit me. Chapter 9. Leo Brouwer. Yusa and Pedro met for the first time in 1493 on a remote island sprinkled east of the northern Caribbean, where the Caribbean Sea, Gulf of Mexico, and Atlantic Ocean kiss. Pedro was an impoverished yet graceful conquistador, conqueror, from Spain who traveled through unknown lands in order to open up new trade routes and conquer territory. Mr. Columbus's name had already been whispered into the ears of most of his crew by this time. Yusa was a simple Taino woman, Taino referring to a group of indigenous people living in the Caribbean, yet originally from South America. She had a smile that lit up the moon, and an intrepid voice that many men would obey upon hearing. The conquistadors arrived from every side of the Antilles to confront a rich and diverse population, where each village was ruled by a special prince, and the coastal line was fettered by the best fishermen the world had ever witnessed. War was already abundant within the Antilles. The Taino were enduring a long, vicious campaign by the Caribs, a neighboring group which drove the Taino people to the northeast of the Caribbean, although many Tainos separated and hid elsewhere. This is where Pedro met Yusa, in a place called Ayita, land of the high mountains, where the mountainous side of the island of Hispaniola met the Atlantic Ocean. Conquistador Pedro swam for his life shortly after deciding that he did not wish to go down with his ship, which had collided with giant rocks not far from Hispaniola. He stumbled upon land to find several fishermen who decided to spare his life and take him to Yusa. Yusa was a Taino Shakik, chief, who had fled almost certain death from the Caribs with 10 of her most trusted and loved disciples. The people of Taino had non-gender structures of hierarchy where Taino women lived amongst themselves, free to engage in whatever recreational activities they wished, free to make love when they wished, and commonly accepted as leaders and political voices across the islands. Pedro did not feel the need to enact the vicious and arrogant attitudes of every other conquistador that had set foot upon the land. This was not because he was vastly outnumbered, but because his sensibility was one of exploring, not capturing. He introduced himself by kneeling and kissing the ground. Yusa took kindly to this gesture and signaled him to stand. A few days of cautious respect ensued, reciprocated by both parties, until one day Yusa asked for his hand and took him on a 4-hour journey across the high mountains. Yusa showed Pedro the place where her father had fallen, the tree where a yellow-nosed albatross sat still in complete splendor for an hour, and the many caves where her ancestors had made drawings of gods, wars, love, and everyday life. When the sun was setting, the two of them returned to the spot where they had first met. When the sun had finally disappeared, they rested next to each other and touched each other. Pedro used his 2 forefingers to walk across the landscape of Yusa's naked, smooth body. He began his journey from the nape of Yusa's neck, all the way across her slender shoulders, down toward the slopes of her back that naturally directed him to her spine. Time began slow, pure and naive, navigated only by two of his fingers experiencing heart-piercing joy and ecstatic sensuousness. There were no continents on Yusa's body, no boundaries, and no rocks which would end his journey. There were no friends, no memories, just touch and its angelic effects. Pedro fell asleep while roaming Yusa's naked body. He could not be entirely sure, but he dreamt that shortly after he had closed his eyes, Yusa took a similar journey herself and ended the expedition by drawing two overlapping triangles on his left arm, making a further third triangle in the middle of the two. The imprint would always be there for Pedro, as if the past, present, and future has lost their distinct trajectories and had met somewhere deep inside all three to coalesce like the lattice structure of a crystal extending in all directions. This touch stayed with Pedro all through his sleep until he and Yusa would awaken the next day to an onslaught of torture and eventual death by the Caribs. But this triangle would go further than flesh and blood, and transcend time and place in order to nestle itself within a vast secret history of touches that no mere human could successfully vanquish. 500 years later, and the same two triangles would be found etched into a cliff face not far from where the two lovers lay, discovered by Professor E. G. Coswinkle. The eccentric paleontologist would suggest that the two triangles had a dual meaning. Firstly, that the unification of both triangles symbolized the connection of the male and female, making a further infantile triangle which expressed eternal love and the creation of a child. Secondly, Mr. Coswinkle proposed that the two triangles depicted the place of Yusa's origin, a place where fertile land is abundant, Cubayo, a great place, Cuabano, and as we know it, Cuba. Such marks signal the praise of a Cuban landscape. Chapter 10. Celine Carr. I found the Eaton Oak Hotel at about 1 a.m. I was thinking about James' snowflakes, Brian's knife wound, Terry's mayfly. I looked up at all the dark trees in the evening light. A tree is a road that goes up into the sky, I said to myself. The place felt at once familiar. Many of my dreams consist of myself walking around towns and cities confidently, which in real life I do not know and have never been to. There is a place in my dreams where I return to. A snicket past an old cathedral takes me down the back gardens of many houses and stranded dogs. I finally reach an old train track adjacent to a river. I walk on the train tracks for miles and miles until I see a building. I cannot bring myself to enter the house from the front, so I jump over the back gate and find a glass sliding door. Just as I am about to attempt opening this sliding door, I wake up. I still do not know what exists behind that sliding door. In my dreams, I have never been myself, but all people. My experience is the experience that all persons will and could have. I look down at the gravel in the car park, and it reminds me of the gravel I thought about in Boston. I feel as though the whole world is whispering something to me, yet I am too ignorant to understand. I stumble into the reception and enact that unique experience only drunk people would be aware of, to attempt to think rationally under the influence of alcohol. It was a bit tricky, but I soon punched in my key code on the locker number that was synchronized with my room number. I procured the key and walked the stairs up to the third floor, where I found my room. I was in. All I wanted to do was drink my second bottle of Heinrich Hartl and find a small opening in the bathroom window where I could stare out from and smoke cigarettes. Why smoke cigarettes? What else can one do when they are drinking? One is too drunk to do anything else but puff away. Cigarettes should be seen as friends in this light. I lighted a cigarette and allowed strange thoughts to pass through me. I wondered whether to be lost was actually to be found, and whether to be found was actually to be lost. At least in my solitude, I was open to all other lonely creatures and sounds. We had a sort of pact. To be in love is sometimes to be lost within an array of feelings and routines. One becomes familiar with a lover's touch, their house, their car, and then before you know it, you have somehow been wrenched out of it or have escaped it, yet the exact same kiss and house and car is waiting for someone else. The same television set with the same television programs, the same slightly disgusting wine glasses that would come out at the end of the day. I have spent my whole life hiding from the cars that my ex-lovers owned. I would jump into a skip on seeing one, regardless of who was driving it. Am I really as different as I think I am? I have never been here like the others. I do not have meaningful encounters with people. People are like dreams to me. Even Isabel feels like a dream to me now. I poked my head out of the lavatory window and stared at a wall 2 meters in front of me. I thought about dinosaurs, and how a duck knew which direction south was. Out of nowhere, my phone decided to make a sound. It was from Celine at night. I hovered the phone just above my nose and read the message. Sam, you really are taking this seriously, aren't you? I've spoken with Brian and James and some of the others, and we are coming for you. We all really should have met up sooner. I'm excited to hear more about you. None of us knew Ben had another friend so important to him. Just sit tight, and we'll be there as soon as we can. Where exactly are you? We really look forward to seeing you. If you need to contact me sooner, just shoot me an email on here. God bless. Celine Carr. Was this the moment when everything would start to make sense? Was this the moment where I would be whisked away by the ghost of Benjamin and all his friends? Just to talk? To be in the company of people that gave a damn, that felt things, that wanted to talk politics, but more importantly wanted to ask me how I was? Would I become lifelong friends with these people, playing chess with James or Brian at Celine's villa on a summer's evening, whilst the rest of them put on a Greek play with flowers and masks? Would I be invited to dance toward the end of the evening with a wreath one of the ladies had made for me? Could I look up at the stars with them? Could they teach me each constellation whilst reading my palm with soft, sensitive strokes and hushed voices? But did Benji really like these people? I fell onto the bed, and for the first time a wave of relaxation swept over me. I had not slept in a bed for days, and I soon gave in to the comforts of duvet and pillows. Yes, the minor chords were still there. Toseland Forest would be full of nocturnal nightmares on legs right about now. Most of the world would be rattling away with human activity. Many writers, if they indeed still existed, would be maniacally placing ink on paper or finger to keyboard, in tune to a new call of inspiration or simply to the vertigo of their own self-obsession. A helicopter may be scouting the skies somewhere with distant chops keeping a young couple from gaining some long-earned rest. I let my arms and legs find a position where they would agitate no more. I let my eyelids creep over my eyes. I was about to sleep to the image of a giant flea market full of old collectible classical records, but I was brought back to life with another beep and buzz from my phone. I knew Isabel would want to say good night. I knew she was there for me, really. I needed someone to love me. I need someone to love me. I stretched across the bed and looked at the screen. Dear Sam, we are all very proud of you for going on this trip. The others emailed me, I hope you don't mind, and told me everything that you have been doing. I really don't know how to begin this email, Sam. I found out about Benji's death not long after the rest of you, about 2 months after. I have been living in Austria for about 7 years now. After Benji and I broke up, I felt it was best to go into a new country. New country, new life. You know what they say. I did something very terrible to him, and I have never forgiven myself. But we were young, and I wasn't ready for the world that Benji kept telling me about, kept hoping for. A house where we could live, love, and be loved in, with children and responsibility, and learning and sharing. He had always kept a part of him to himself, but he adored me back then, and I just didn't have the guts to go through with it all. I know that Celine and the gang are coming to visit you. What a bunch. Benji told me all about them when we were together. You are a very special boy, Sam, and I fear that only coincidence has made you come all this way with so many questions. Unfortunately, I cannot come and see you with the others. I don't know what you expected to get out of this journey, but I think it must come to an end here. It all feels like a giant confusion that has got out of hand. I do hope that you have a beautiful wife to go back to, or a child that misses their father. I'm sorry if you feel as if you have had a wasted trip. Speak to the others tomorrow, and they will try and explain it all. Good luck with everything that life throws at you, Sam. I said goodbye to Benji a long time ago. He just never knew it. I recommend you do the same. All the very best. Sam Wood. I poured the remaining Heinrich Hartl bottle into my now empty glass. Austrian wine, I said to myself. That would explain it. And so Benji's real friends were coming to comfort me, to let the news settle upon me gently. Would they, after comforting me, take me to an asylum, or worse, would they want to kill me? I wish I could say that I finally felt as if everything had come together. Being led through foreign towns, and even more so through foreign personalities, I had finally found Benjamin's lover. I had found his home, his event that once consecrated would split his life into the two directions he had spoken about. I wish I could say that, through the reveal of Benjamin's lost lover, I had put his neurotic heart to rest. I had found what he wanted me to find all those years ago. I wish I could also say that whereas Benjamin's road would end at my mere awareness of this woman's existence, my road would start through the realization that I must go back and share my life devotedly to Isabel. I wish I could say and feel all these things, but instead I sat there pondering on how the last weeks of my life, in fact the last 3 years, had been propelled by an email that was even meant for me. An email that, through the addition of a hyphen, capital letter or number, would have traveled to the correct recipient, to the Austrian lady, Samantha Wood. Did I care whether she had not then received the message so intently entrusted to her? Did I care how the news of her ex-lover had reached her and in what form? Not really. I had lost the reason why I was in this hotel with a parked car outside. The reason, if any, had literally been snatched out of my hands, and I appear now no more deserving of Benjamin's quest than the email that addressed me when I booked this hotel. I sit here because of Benjamin, drinking his wine, smoking his cigarettes, thinking his thoughts, speaking to his friends, fighting his battles. And for what? I take another sip of Benjamin's wine and stretch my head around the bathroom window again. Cars are rushing by, full of people I do not know, leading lives that I could not even try to follow. Church bells will soon begin to sound, and are understood by only the smallest amount of people who live in the town. It had also dawned on me that I had not spoken to anyone for 3 months. There was the illusion of communication, missed calls, answer phone messages, emails, etc. But I had not properly and carnally addressed a single soul. I wondered if I had even done the things I thought I had done in the last few days. Have I just been home with Isabel? Had I, yet again, wandered too far into the realms of my enthusiastic imagination? Do I find myself with the same feelings for Benji as Professor James Macaulay had at 16? Or is Samantha Wood simply the name of this displaced desire, to be his wife, to be his lover? Am I in fact Benjamin Flew, who, on the cusp of annihilation, dreamt this tale up in order to justify my existence? And if so, the real question is, who is this man Sam Wood? Just a stranger I met, some man I had read on a poster somewhere? I take my phone from out of my pocket and start typing. Everyone becomes who they truly are through 2 types of pain. A pain handed over to you, sometimes indirectly or unintentionally, and a pain which is self-inflicted. Chapter 12. Lawrence Green. Benjamin Flew. Now that's a name I haven't heard for a while. I miss that screwball. He could make rockets and missiles from out of that guitar of his. Bird would summon the ghosts of Reinhardt, Chucky B, even Segovia. But Benjamin would just go for it. No nonsense. Benjamin flew, all right. When he came up at closing time one night at the Rialto whilst everyone was leaving, picking up Jimmy's chipped hollow body and just letting loose with a cigarette in his mouth, me and Dirty Eddie jumped back from that stage quicker than Billie Holiday could down a Manhattan and started whispering the beat to drop on the third chorus. Didn't even know where Benji's head was, like he was actually playing. Mr. Shaman started shaking the cocktails again, 'cause he saw everyone coming back and had a smile on his face so wide it looked like Leadbelly's neck after he was slit ear to ear by some good-for-nothing. The audience howled and screamed like the Beatles were playing. Someone left the door open and every car honk and pneumatic drill reverberated through and harmonized with Benji's guitar perfectly. It was a sweltering July, and I remember not wanting to be anywhere else but there at the Rialto with Benji. Everyone ordered another round of drinks, and suddenly Benji started looking at me whilst pointing down with his head. I started lowering my volume so he could take center stage, but he kept pointing downward harder and harder. I went as quiet as I could, but the man was hysterical. After the jam, he came up to me and said that I wasn't listening to him. I flipped and shouted that I couldn't get quieter without leaving the bar. Benji puts his arm around me and says, "There was a red admiral right next to your feet." That's the kind of guy Benji was. An anomaly. I mean, who else could recite to you every Moses Allison track and distinguish between different butterflies? The guy should have had a funeral procession when his soul left the physical plane. Louis Armstrong should have fronted it. So, you must be the kid who taught Benji classical guitar, right? There's another thing I didn't know about him until later. Mozart, Vivaldi, Wagner, all a bit stuck up for me, but he didn't seem to think so. I met him a few weeks before it happened, I was playing with this new female singer, all hype, no bite. He came to the show and seemed kind of okay. He talked about you a lot. Maybe he just finished one of your lessons or something. Said you were a good kid. Said you reminded him of what he was like back in the day, full of sense but no pence. Said you were saving up to go to music college. I'll shoot you an email next time I'm in the area. Stuck playing covers for now, but I'll throw in an occasional saxophone flourish if I see you in the crowd. And kid, just remember, whatever life may bring you, if you leave the door open, a butterfly will always come through. My warmest regards. Lawrence Green, a.k.a. the most handsome man alive. Chapter 13. Bela Bartok. I remember a famous person commenting on Bela Bartok's music. I cannot remember the person, and I cannot precisely remember what he said, but I recall it was something like this. With Bartok, one cannot speak of his music, especially his quartets. Anything thought up and articulated would only dent the perfection of his oeuvre. After thorough engagement with Bartok's work, I sincerely regret to inform you that I cannot add anything else to it. Wittgenstein said something similar about life's most pertinent metaphysical problems, such as the meaning of life, the soul, morality, and God. What can be said at all can be said clearly, and what we cannot talk about we must pass over in silence. Maybe this is why Wittgenstein took up whistling as a means of expression in between silence and language. Maybe he had realized in the end that all utterances are but a pointless whistle away. In the last years of his life, Wittgenstein would whistle, go for walks, and be depressed. Good luck whistling Bartok's tunes.